Hey guys, it's Jimbo's Grapes here, today with another video, and this time I'm going to be doing a much deeper dive into industry because this is something that has been requested a little bit, and I think it's about time to make an actual proper guide that goes over it a little bit more extensively. Um, so just as a bit of a preamble, it's going to be the introduction. Industry is not something that is that complicated, but it does require a fair bit of effort, and it requires lots of different dynamics and things coming together in order to do it. That is to say, it is very, very difficult to be a solo industrialist. And what I mean by solo is being on one account doing everything that there is to do with industry. Because in order to get all the components to make stuff in this game, you need to basically explore every single faucet that the game has to offer. And it all kind of comes together, and that was the original design of the game, was to have all of these things come together so that people could work together. Now, if you are playing alone and you want to do industry and you want to do it without using the market or without using courtmates or without relying on other people, you will need to have multiple accounts. It's really just that simple. Obviously, you could do anything you want with a single account, but you are going to be at a massive, massive disadvantage. So, with that being said, let's jump right into it. I don't want to take too long with the intro, so let's get right into doing some industry. So, with that preamble out of the way, these are all of the things that you need to do industry. You need kernels, you need fragments, you need raw resources, and you need decoders. These are the base things that you need in order to start doing industry. So, kernels. These are the 5 different types of kernels currently in the game, one for each race. Oh, I'm actually missing Pedestal here. So there's 6 different kernels, but there's one for each race. There's industrial kernels, there's common kernels, and there are high-tech kernels. Second thing you'll need, and I'll be going into what you use these for later, is fragments. They range from damage to perfect, damage, functional, and perfect. There are common ones, Thaladica ones, Nimquil ones, and Pedestal ones. So in this image here, I've only got the perfect of each because I was too lazy to unstack all of them. But each different color also has 3 different tiers, from damaged, functional, and perfect, as well as the common ones. And I'm going to be going into what all of these do, where you find them, and what they're used for when we get to those sections. Raw resources. These are your 3 alpha plants, your 1 beta plant, which is Neuralgus. You've got your Titan ore, and then you've got your 3 factional ores, which are all available on the Alpha Island, including the Titan. That's Sterminate, Imentium, and Silgium. Calixium, which is currently not really in the game other than refining certain items. You get Calixium through some various means, but for the most part, not really a part of the game right now. You don't use it to build anything, not something to worry about. Fluxor, which is the new ore that has been added to the game recently, which is used to build the endgame robots, the destroyers, and everything to do with them. Then you've got your 3 liquids, you've got your 2 alpha liquids, your HTT and your liquizite, and then you've got your Perpetuum, which is the beta. So out of all of these, only 4 of them are not found on Hirschfield. That's your Neuralgus, which you can actually grow on Hirschfield, but I'll get to that when we get to that. Your Calixium, your Fluxor, and your Perpetuum. So I'm going to go over this stuff a little bit more when we actually get into refining, but for now just know that for the most part you can get these things on Hirschfield, and this is what you need as your raw resources. Then the last but not least thing you need is decoders. These are used in order to reverse engineer stuff, which again we will get to in a moment. Okay, so with the kernels, first thing we're going to look at is research. So I'm going to go into my game here, and we're going to look at the skills that you need in order to get research We're going to look over the skills that you need in order to unlock your research. So if I go into my agent profile, this is on my industrial account, then you go into extensions, and you go into industry, there are certain things you need in order to unlock your research. So if I go into my non-industrial account and we open up my research, you'll notice that all of this is dark. It's all grayed out. That's because you actually need skills in order to even unlock the research to do it. So if I look in this one, you'll notice a difference there. It's all bright and I can actually access all of it. So again, dark and bright. Now the reason for that is you actually need to get the skills in order to get the research. So it goes from 1 to 10, and I mean it's pretty obvious here. As you unlock these, it will light up each section depending on which one you do it in. There's common, industrial, inimical, pedestal, and thelodica. So the common one will actually unlock both common 1 and common 2 trees, and then the rest of it's pretty straightforward. Industrial unlocks industrial, thelodica, inimical, and pedestal. So those are the skills that you need specifically for research, is these 4 right here. Sorry, these 5 right here. 1 for each race, 1 for industrial, and 1 for common. Okay, so now to actually unlock research. This is where kernels come in. So if we go back into our game and we look at our research, that's our corporation research, you'll notice that there are some numbers under here. So it's kind of difficult to see because the UI is quite small and there's no way to zoom in. But there's a common, and then there's you'll need 2 types of kernels for each research. Typically you'll need common and then a factional research. So for common, most of them actually only have 1, and then tier 4, any tier 4 is usually going to require some amount of high tech. So if I wanted to, say, research some of these, I would need to get my kernels. So let's say I wanted to research the small armor piercing bullets. You see, it's hard to see, but I need 1600 common kernels. So I'd unstack here, 1600, and then you right click on this and you can actually choose to research it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, once it's researched, you can also donate it to your corp if this isn't something that you're going to be doing, or if you've maxed out your tree, you can donate to your corp, but we're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is now it sees lit up. It's no longer red. I can actually click on it and choose to research it. Now I've got this item researched. So the reason I personally don't have any ammo researched is something that we'll get into in the future. But yeah, so that's how you go ahead and actually research things. You need to get the kernels, which we'll go into next, and then you need to research them. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is kernel sources. Where do you actually get kernels from? So kernels drop from NPCs. So we're going to go back into our game here, and we're going to talk about NPCs quickly. So on Hirschfield, actually let's look at the whole map here. So on Hirschfield, it's split up into 4 quadrants. So the top right quadrant over here, you see how it goes to the blue island? So there's actually blue robots over here, and that's an easy way to remember that. So the top right has blue, the top left has yellow or thelodica bots, and the bottom left has got green. Now the bottom right of the island, the bottom right section of the island has syndicate, and it also has industrial robots. So the way that kernels work is there's 2 factors. It matters what type of robot you're killing, what faction it's from, and it also matters the level of robot it is. Whether it's light or heavy doesn't matter, although heavy robots will drop more kernels. So that's important to remember. So how it works is, and you'd probably be able to guess this, is that if I were to go kill blue bots up here, they're going to drop blue kernels. Yellow will drop yellow kernels, green will drop green kernels, industrial will drop industrial kernels, and syndicate only drops common kernels. Now, the way you get common kernels and high-tech kernels is it depends on the tier of the robot. So robots are tiered from 1 to 5. So the example I usually like to give is blue because they're the easiest to notice. But when you actually look at NPCs, they will have a prefix on them. So for example, blue bots will have a prefix of first star, second star, third star, fourth, or fifth. So if you get something like a cremator, which is a type of assault robot for blue, it'll say first cremator or first star cremator or second cremator or third cremator, and that's their tier. From 1 to 3, from tiers 1 to 3, they drop common kernels. Tiers 4 and 5 drop high-tech kernels. Now, that being said, tier 5 drops the most factional kernels as well. So, now we're going to go into my methods for getting kernels. What I like to do is I like to use, well, there's a couple different methods I use. For industrial kernels, there is a spawn right here on Hirschfield. So I'll hover over this for a second. That's 1570, 1570, 1700. There's a spawn right here that has got a couple scarabs and a couple lithus. And there is 0 threat of dying. So for industrial kernels, this is where I like to go. There's also another spawn that's bigger if you can handle it. And I'll go over a couple fits later for what you can use to do this spawn. There's another spawn right here that has got several rivelers and symbionts, which drop a lot of high-tech and a lot of industrial kernels. This spawn over here drops common and industrial kernels. Other than that, if you're just looking for a static spawn, any corner of the island you can go and look for what you would like in order to whatever's in your skill range and where you're at in the game. Now, for me personally, I like to do these things called taps. If you've been watching my channel pretty much at all, you know that I am a huge tap enthusiast. I've got several videos showing how to do taps, but just to show what they look like, I'm on my combat account now. I've got taps in here. So the best way to get common kernels is to do tier 1 medium taps on Beta Island. They go quite quickly, but you need a lot of firepower to do them. If you do not have a good know-how, or at least I would say a minimum of 3 heavy mechs with good repair bots, you will not be able to do these. And it will also be very difficult to do them on Alpha Island because you don't get the splash damage helping you. Now, that being said, in order to get factional kernels, one of the best ways to get factional kernels is tier 3 light taps. They go extremely fast. If you do them on Beta Islands, you have a lot of splash damage, and they give a ton of kernels, usually about 12 to 15,000 factional kernels per tap, and they take about 5 minutes to do. I'll let you guys do the math on that, but it's extremely quick factional kernel acquisition. Now, if you're just starting out, level 1 light taps are something that you can do. I'm going to be providing fits and methods for how to do these at the end of the video. But level 1 light taps are also very, very good for acquiring kernels and common kernels. So this is where I said at the start of the video that you're going to need multiple faucets in order to do industry, because in order to get kernels, one of the main and best ways of getting kernels is to do combat, is to do PvE, is to do static farms or taps. Now, there is another method for getting kernels. Actually, there's 2 more methods. The second method is to do artifacting. So artifacting is you get an artifacting bot. So I'll just show this here. And you go out and you find artifacts. Now, artifacts are a very, very small source of kernels. You will not get a lot of kernels doing artifacts. It's not even comparable how quickly you get kernels doing taps versus how quickly you get kernels doing artifacts. That being said, it is an option. If you really, really do not want to do combat, it's very easy to set up a artifact bot. The third method is, of course, to do the market. So if you go into the market and you go into industrial implements, you can see there are people selling kernels here, and you can There's actually no one selling kernels here, but you can purchase the kernels that way. And obviously, I'm not going to go into the market for anything else, but obviously you can buy stuff off the market for all of these methods. If that is something that you really, really want to do and you want to build up an empire doing trading, that is in almost all games. Market is the number one way to make any sort of profit. Although I will say that the market in this game is a little less active, so it takes much longer to acquire wealth through the market. But if that was something that you wanted to try and do, you're more than welcome to do that instead. So you can see here people are selling Nimical kernels. They're honestly not that bad at prices, but again, it's just another thing you can do. So the main way you do it is through combat. The second way you can do it is through artifacting. And the third way, of course, is the market. So that's everything to do with research. And let's move on to the next topic. Prototyping. So let's first off talk about what prototyping is. So once you've actually researched something, you're able to right click on it and hit prototype. So if I right click on these ones that I don't have researched, you can see that it's not actually letting me do anything with them. If I go over to my corp knowledge, it'll let me prototype it from there because we have it unlocked in the corporation. But in order to prototype something, you need to have it researched. So you research something, then you can prototype it. Now, the other thing you can do is you can go into your prototype facility and prototype through here. Personally, I like going on my research tree just because it's a little bit cleaner, and I'll prototype through here. It'll actually bring me over to this screen, but it opens it up, and it opens up this particular section that I'm in, and it allows me to prototype an entire line if I wanted to. So with prototyping, you do not need to have the tier 1 item to do this. You can prototype a tier 1 item, but it will just give you a standard item. It will not give you the prototype version. Now, let me see. I actually don't know if I have any. I do have some prototypes. So you see the prototypes here. It says T3P. That means it's a prototype. You can actually use these as modules. I believe they have slightly lower fitting requirements. There are some people that do that, but it's a very, very expensive way to fit your robots. Prototypes cost 10 times the amount of a regular item. So it's not something that you want to do lightly unless you really, really know what you're doing. So the other thing with prototyping that you need is fragments. So, actually I didn't even go into the skills yet, so let's do that. So agent profile, extensions. So again, in the industry, there are efficiency modifiers for prototyping. Then you can see prototype, prototype, prototype. This is all material efficiency. This is something I haven't invested heavily in because there are diminishing returns on your prototyping. Once you get to about 60 to 70 points, so these increase it by points. Sorry, once you get to a certain amount of points, your efficiency starts to decline depending on how many more points you put into it. So, for example, to go from 0 to 50 efficiency, you might need something like 100 points. But then to go from 50 to 60 efficiency, you'll need another 100 points to increase to that next bit of efficiency. So there's heavy diminishing returns when it comes to material efficiency. So it's not something that I have really prioritized myself because I have a lot of resources, and saving 5 to 10% on resources for thousands and thousands and possibly millions of EP is not something that I'm interested in at this point. I will get these eventually, but it's not something that I want to do right now. Parallel processing, this is a very important skill. It allows you to prototype more things at once. So if I go to my prototype facility, and I go to monitoring, you can see here I've got 0 out of 12. If you do not have parallel processing, you will only be able to do 2 things, 2 prototypes at once. And if you're going to be doing lots of industry, if you're going to be mass producing, this is definitely one of the more important skills. Okay, so that's all the skills to do with prototyping. The other thing you need with prototyping is fragments. So if we remember back to that first slide, the things that we need, prototyping is heavily requires fragments. So fragments are these guys down here. You can see I've got a lot of them. As far as I know, I'm one of the few people that has got tens of thousands of fragments. These are tricky to get when you're just starting. So again, if we go to prototype and we look at a random robot here, you can see we need damaged common fragments and we need damaged Nimco fragments. If we look at something a little bit more advanced, like let's say a Fellows, you can see this guy requires a few hundred of the functional and perfect fragments. So fragments also come from the exact same sources as kernels. You get fragments from killing NPCs and you get fragments from artifacting. Fragments work in a similar way in that the lower tier of robots will give you more damage common fragments. So if you do tier 1 or tier 2 robots, you're going to get mostly damaged. Tier 3, you're going to get mostly functional. Tier 4 and 5, you're going to be finding yourself with a lot more perfect common fragments. So as an example of that, for green, I almost exclusively do tier 5 enemies. I do the level 3 taps which spawn tier 5 green enemies. So you can see I've got about 22,000 perfect pedestal fragments, whereas I've only got 10,000 damaged pedestal fragments. So if this was something that I was in dire need of, I would need to go and start doing more of the lower tier, the level 2 and level 3 enemies in order to get more damaged. Now, one last note on prototyping. So again, once you've researched, you can prototype something, and once you have a prototype, once you build a prototype, it will spit out a prototype item. And we're going to get into what you do with those next. One last important thing, you can see how these are yellow here. Whereas if I go to those robots, if I go to those destroyers, they're only white. So what yellow means is it means that my corporation has also researched those. This is extremely important for prototyping because it reduces the cost of a prototype by half. That is a huge thing. So you go from needing 10 times as many resources for a regular prototype to 5 times as many resources. Now, if we look at something like these destroyers, they have got an absolutely insane cost. To prototype one of these is hundreds of millions of nick in order to get all of these resources. So when you're cutting that in half, you are really, really saving yourself on a lot of resources. So corp research is extremely important when it comes to prototyping, having your corp research and your personal research. For things like just regular max light robots, assault robots, the prices aren't that bad regardless, so it's not as important. But once you start getting into heavy mechs and destroyers and T4 items, it really starts to add up if your corporation has good research. So again, we're going to go back to here. My methods, it's going to be the exact same way as farming kernels. You can also get fragments from doing artifacting, but my preferred way is definitely doing those spawns. You get thousands or like tens to hundreds times more fragments per hour doing it with the taps. Okay, so once you've prototyped something, now you need to reverse engineer it. And this is how you get a CT. So if we go back into the game, we go to reverse engineering. So if I was going to go into my storage and grab one of my prototypes, you'll notice if I grab one of these tier 2 items, this is a regular tier 2 item, and I try to pull it into here, nothing is happening. Absolutely nothing. But if I grab my prototype and I drag it into here, now I can actually use it. And I can use it, what's called a decoder. If we remember back to that first slide, that was one of the items that we need for industry. And we can plop a decoder in here of any level 4 or higher. So if I go into my industry and I pop a level 4 decoder in there, it's going to give me a CT with a certain amount of efficiency, a certain amount of ratio. Now your efficiency here, if you increase this, it will actually slowly increase the amount of cycles that you get out of this. So if I were to bump this up, say another 20 points, I might get material ratio of 96 and time ratio of 96, which might mean that I can make extra items out of these. Now, me personally, I left it at an even 5 value, so that way I can make CTs that are 100, which is the max amount of mass manufacturing that you can do at a time once you get the skills. So that out of the way, let's look at the skills. Again, back in the industry, this is going to be a very, very similar thing. And this is something you guys can see for yourself. If you look in there, it's fairly straightforward. CT efficiency, this is what I was talking about. If you can increase your CT efficiency, it will allow you to get more bang out of your prototypes. You can get more cycles on your items. Now, the second thing that we're going to look at is time and efficiency. As you can see, this is something that I have not put a lot of points into. I've only gotten them to 5 because, well, time is infinite. I have all the time in the world. But it is something you can increase if you are impatient and you really want to start pumping out CTs. But with a bit of planning, I haven't had any issues. And yeah, of course you can make it faster, but it's not going to be much faster. So it's not something that I have personally found to be that important. Okay, so quick little recap. You research an item, you prototype the item. Once you have your prototype, you then go into reverse engineering and you can reverse engineer the item. That will give you an item called a CT, which if we go in here, this is what a CT looks like, one of these. So all the CTs kind of have similar images. It'll say what it is underneath, and it'll have a ratio. So one is for the factory ratio and one is for the time ratio. We'll get into those once we go into the next slide. Oh, sorry. For CTs, my methods. Oh, geez, I completely forgot where you get decoders from. So decoders, again, same methods as before. You get decoders from NPCs, from PvE. You also get them from artifacting, but you get them at a much, much, much lower rate. So how do decoders drop? So we're going to go back into those tiers of enemies. You can see here I've got lots of level 10 decoders, lots of level 9, lots of level 8s. Some people will really struggle to get level 9, level 10s, and the reason is because NPCs can only drop up to double what their rank is in decoders. Now, what the heck do I mean by that? I mean, if it's a level 1 enemy, so back to our example, we go to a first star cremator, that means it can drop up to level 2 decoders. If it's a second star cremator, it can drop up to level 4 decoders. Again, double what it is. Level 3 can drop up to level 6, level 4 can drop up to level 8, and level 5 can drop up to, you guessed it, level 10. So, level 10 decoders are the best you can currently get. I doubt that they're going to be adding more than that. But if you're wondering why you are never getting any level 10 decoders, that's why you need to be killing tier 5 enemies, which do not naturally spawn on Hirschfield. So if you're only killing static spawns on Hirschfield and you're not going on to beta islands to either kill tier 5 static spawns, or you're not doing level 3 taps, you will not be getting level 9 or level 10 decoders. That's where they are from. Hirschfield does have up to level 4 enemies, so you can get up to level 8, but you will not see level 10. So when I reverse engineer something, what I like to do, if it's the first time I have made an item, I will just bring up a notepad here. So if it's the first time I have made an item, I like to do a tiered amount of CTs. Now, there's a reason for this. So my tier 4 CT, I will say have 90 cycles. My tier 3 CT, I'll make it have 95 cycles. My tier 2 CT, I'll make it have 100. And my tier 1 CT, it's not important for the tier 1, but I'll try and make it have 105. So, why the heck do I do this? Well, what happens when you go through and you make your CTs like this is you will end up with 4 extra tier 1s. Now, the reason you only get 4 is because when you prototype, the tier 2 prototype requires 1 regular tier 1 item. The tier 3 prototype requires one regular tier 2 item, and the tier 4 prototype requires one regular tier 3 item. If we look at that, you can see this is part of the requirements right here to actually make this. So when I do my first run of an item that I've never built before, I will do 105, so that way I'll end up with 4 extra tier 1s, I'll end up with 4 extra tier 2s, I'll end up with 4 extra tier 3s, and I'll end up with, no extra tier 4s, I'll just end up with 90 tier 4 items. So if I were to build all these through, my final product would be 90 T4s. I guess I don't need to write this up, but I'll end up with 90 T4s, 4 tier 3s, 4 tier 2s, and 4 tier 1s. That way, the next time I go to build a cycle of these items, I don't have to wait for my first item to build. So if I were to prototype, try to get to tier 4 for the very first time, I'd have to wait for my tier 1 item to build. Then I'd have to reverse engineer, prototype, I'd have to prototype, reverse engineer, build my tier 2 item. Then I would have to go in, I'd have to prototype my tier 3 item, wait for this one to build, prototype my tier 3 item, reverse engineer it, build it, and then I could finally prototype, reverse engineer, and start building my tier 4 item. It's an extremely time-consuming thing to go raw from tier 1 to tier 4 if you don't already have a couple of the tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1 items, which is why I like to build my CTs like that for the first one. Once I've got extra of all of them, and if you farm a lot, you'll eventually get some of these items already. It's not a problem, so you can just go ahead and I like to do 100 of each cycle because, again, like I said before, you can actually only do a maximum of 100 mass manufactured items in the factory, which is going to be the next thing that we will talk about. Okay, factory. So this one is a complete EP hog. Let's look at the skills. So again, we go to industry, there's material efficiency, there's production lines, there's 3 different production lines, there's mass production, there's time efficiency. So there is a ton of skills related to the factory. Decalibration efficiency is another one which isn't that important, but it's also something that you can look at if you are bad at managing your factory. So when you have a factory, you can actually extract CTs. So if I were to extract the CT right now, because I have 0 skills in that, you can see it goes from 65 down to 58. So if you are someone that likes to extract and mess around with your factory instead of just completely pushing through lines, that might be something you want to be interested. But for me personally, I build something until the CT is completely worn out, so it's pretty much irrelevant for me. Now, material efficiency. Again, if we go to our factory, you can see I've got a material ratio up here, and I've got a time ratio. Again, time ratio is not something I personally worry about, but if you want your things to build faster, that is of course something you can do. Material ratio, this basically means if you were to look at an item, let's just take any old item here, and look at its components. These are the raw components that this item is required to make. Now, since I've only got a 70% efficiency, since I've only got a 70% efficiency, or 69% efficiency, it'll actually cost me more materials to make these items. Also, there's a material efficiency over here. So, as the CT produces, every single cycle, these both go down by 1. And as this goes down, every single item takes a little bit more to make. So you can see right here, if we look at a tier 2 Gauss gun. So let's look at this one. So I also want to point something out here. So these are the components of a tier 2 Gauss gun. It requires 100, 100, and 100. But for me, because of my efficiency, it cost me 111. It actually ends up being 11% more for me. Now, despite that, you can see I've only got 69% efficiency, but that's not actually the case how it ends up being over here. Let's look at the universal plates, because these ones don't have a super high efficiency. So this is a tier 2 universal plate, and I've got a tier 2 universal plate over here. So you can see this one. it's got 50 less. So this is another thing about the corporation research. It also adds 50 to your material ratio when you are building things. But let's look at that and let's see how important this really is. And this goes back to those diminishing returns. So you can see I've got titanium here, it costs 100. My titanium here that is 50 points less in efficiency costs 112. Remember, we went back to that. If you go back to this one, which is 50 points more in efficiency because of my material ratio here, costs 111. This one's 50 points less, cost 112. It went up by 1% for 50 points, which is why you can see here my material efficiency is 8, 6, and 5. I have not invested heavily in these because each one only gives you 4 points, 4 points, and 4 points. So if I were to improve all of these and spend, it would be a couple 100,000 EP, 200,000 EP probably. I would get maybe 1 to 2% better efficiency with actually building items, which is not something that I'm particularly interested in. Again, maybe way down the line in another year or two from now, when I've got the EP to blow, I will do that, but that is not something that I am particularly interested in. So there's the skills. That's my take on them. You do want to put some points into them because, again, it's got diminishing returns. So if you can get your points up to about 200, so again, if we look at my factory, we can see I've got 230. If you can get this up to about 200, you'll start to see those diminishing returns, and you'll start to see less and less lower material efficiencies for actually building the items once you get up to that point. Okay. So material and time ratio, we just talked about that. So there's one other important thing that we need to talk about with material time ratio, and I believe I have it open here. Factory ratios, additional parameters that affect your total efficiency. Relation ratio. This is something that is very important. It's actually one of the most important things for getting this efficiency up, is doing your assignments. So these numbers right here, you can see I'm at 647 on this guy, and I'm at 590 on this guy. If I go to my factory on this guy, you can see I've only got 219 points. So I'm getting 118 from relations. You can see that there. If I go to this guy, I'm getting 129 from relations. And that's only about a 50-point difference between these two. So and you can actually see it is the biggest contributing factor to my efficiency for this. It is my relations. So it's hard to see, so I'll just say this right now. My facility ratio, which I'll go over in a second, is only 25. My relation ratio is 129. My extensions, which I get from my skill points, is only 76. So my relation ratio is actually the biggest contributing factor to my material ratio. So this is why you almost always want to also be doing some sort of missions on your industry bot. It is the biggest contributing factor to your material ratio when you are doing industry. Now, let's get to those facilities. Let's open the map. So on the beta islands, if you are to click on the facility here, you can actually see that the facilities here have got a point system to them. They're all at 25. The beta islands, if we were to just go to a random one here, you can actually adjust these however you want. As you capture beta islands, you can improve the facilities here. So you can see the factor here on this PHM outpost is 125. So it's 100 points higher than the Hirschfield main terminal. So if I were to go build on beta islands, I would be getting probably an extra 3 to 4% efficiency on my materials. Now, for me personally, that's not really worth it. Let's look at this one. So this is the outpost on the beta island that nobody can own, and it's got ratios of 75. Now, I believe once they release Gamma, it can get up to 150, possibly even higher, and then it actually does start becoming, fairly worth it. But As I pointed out, you can see even on Hirschfield with my fairly bad skills and my, somewhat decent relationship, I'm only spending 10% more, 12% more on materials. You can never go below. You can never go below the type of material. Sorry, you can never go below the efficiency. It's got huge diminishing returns. So even if I were to add 100 points onto this, or even 150 points, I would probably only be saving myself about 4 to 5% in materials, which is why I personally don't bother doing it, because the convenience of building on Hirschfield is just way, way outweighing the 5% of materials that I would personally be getting from that. So the last thing I want to talk about is refining and storage management. Oh, and I should probably also say that once you've got your CT, probably should have led with this, but once you've got your CT, I'm going to be doing a recap of all of this right away. So once you've got your CT, all you need to do is, it's got to be in your private storage. If I were to try and drag one of these in here from my extras, it's going to say needs to be in your private storage. It cannot be in a container. So if I were to grab this, put it in my private storage, and then just drag this in, it'll give me a little screen here. I hit OK, and then I can start manufacturing it. So it's right here, and I'm just going to extract this because this is something that I've already built off of and I don't need it anymore. So very simple. And then you can just go in here and you can start saying how many cycles you want. For me, I've got the skill max, so I can make it a max of 100 cycles, and that's about that. One other thing I will quickly mention about CTs, for modules, this time and material ratio goes down by 1 per cycle. So you see how these have 78 cycles left? That means I'll make 78 more items. For robots, you can see how this is 92. Whenever a robot cycles, it goes down by 3. So although there's 92 efficiency here, I can actually only make 31 more robots. As long as it's got 1 point left, I can make a robot off of it. So I can make 31 more mesmers off of this CT. Destroyers, for some reason, they decided to make them cycle off 5 each time. So as long as I've got 1 point left in this, I can make an extra destroyer, but it will go down by 5 each time. So although this has 65 left, I can actually only make 13 more of these destroyers, which will take me a heck of a long time to do anyways, because flux is extremely annoying to get. But I'll go over methods on how to get flux later on in the video. Okay. I think that is everything to do with CTs. Oh yes, refining and storage. So if you're mass producing like this, you can look at all this and you can be like, man, that's kind of hard to keep track of. So what I personally like to do, because I have a lot of resources and I farm a lot and I mine a lot, and then I also buy a lot of resources, what I personally like to do is I will keep all of these resources above 100,000. So you can see all of these resources. It's hard to see, but I've got 170,000 of this, I've got 200,000 of this, I've got 180,000 of this. I check this maybe every couple days. If I log in, I'll take a look at it, and then if any of these dip below 50,000, what I will do is I will come in and I'll just refine 150,000 more of it, bump it back over 200,000. That way, I don't need to worry about it. I've always got resources, because if you run out of these resources, out of these refined materials, you will not be able to keep producing. So, yeah. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about here, which is something that I haven't touched on yet, but how do we actually get these materials? So, refining. So you get these raw resources from mining out in the world. I've got a couple videos on mining already, so I'm not going to go super into detail on this, but basically you get the plants from harvesting, you get the minerals from mining, and then what you need to do is you need to go into here, refinery, and as long as you've got the right things, all you need to do is go in here. Let's say I want to make 100 of this. All I do is hit the create button and it will use it for me. And then once you've got your raw materials, you can begin producing based on what the item needs. Sorry, once you've got your refined materials. The other method for getting refined materials is recycling. So you can see here, I've got a box that says recycle. I actually just recently recycled, but when I do those taps, when I do the static farming with my NPCs, you get a ton of modules. So what I like to do is I try to keep at least 100 of each module, and then anything over 100, I will recycle. So recycling is extremely good. So let's unstack 2 of these because I've got over 100 of those. Now let's pull them in here. So if we look at the information of this, these are the components that is required to make these items. Now, as we saw in my factory, they usually cost about 10 to 12% more than this, so it would actually be like 112 titanium. It's not super important. Now, if I were to recycle these are the items that I would get from it. So you can see I'm actually getting, it says 71% here, but it's actually more like 75%. I mean, it's more than 3/4 that I'm getting back for these items. So one thing that people is always short on is Titan. So you can save yourself a lot of Titan by recycling tier 1 modules because they give you back a lot of the titanium that you need in order to build products. So if I go into my storage, from all the recycling I've done, you can see I've got over 1 million plasticine. I have never made plasticine in this game. I have never refined plasticine. It is all from recycling. Same as a lot of these other basic tier 1 commodities. So again, recycling tier 1 modules is one of the best ways to get a lot of these basic items, to get a lot of these basic refined materials. And you'll save yourself a ton on ores if you actually just go farm static spawns and recycle tier 1 modules. It is also 100% worth it to repair items in order to recycle them. I've done tests on that before, and it is very, very, very good to repair items. Nick-wise, cost-wise, it is very, very efficient to repair items before you recycle them. So just a side note there. Yeah, so that's a bit about the storage management. You want to try and have yourself a bottom threshold and a top threshold that you get your materials back to, and always, if they drop below that threshold, bring them back up to the point that you want them to be. Okay, so missioning. This is the next thing I want to talk about because it is so important for the factory. Skills. Let's go into the skills here. So we're going to be going into diplomacy now. Sorry, relations. So diplomacy is one that I don't have, but that you should probably get. Sorry, not diplomacy. It was reputation management. No, it wasn't this one. Never mind. I am going crazy. I thought there was one that increased the amount of relations you get per one, but I don't know if that's actually true. Anyways, so what I like to do, and I'm going to be going into this, if you have watched my beginner tutorial video, I go into this in quite some detail, but essentially these are the 2 skills you want to get: contract negotiation and fieldcraft specialization. They increase the amount of nick you get quite a lot, and when I go into my builds, I will be talking more about a good missioning setup and what you want to do for that. But basically, what you want to do is do harvesting. Again, this isn't something I'm going to go super into detail here. I will have a link in the description below to my tutorial video on beginning guides, and it goes in depth. Almost entirely the series is on doing missions, so I'm not going to repeat much of that here, but I will link a video on that in the description. So again, islands and rewards, it'll be linked in that video, and standing I've already talked about in the factory, and my methods, I'll go over that once I go over my fitting for my bot. But the general idea is do harvest missions. Okay, so a couple more advanced things. That's basically how you do industry. So before I get into this, I do want to tie this all together and just go really quickly over the entire process without it being broken up. So first thing you do, research using kernels. Second thing you do, you right click, prototype, and you prototype using fragments and refined resources. That gives you a prototype. Which looks like this. Next thing you do, you go into reverse engineering, you drag your prototype in here, and you drag a decoder in here. Decoders gotten from NPCs and artifacting. So once you drag your prototype and your decoder into here, it will give you a CT. Next thing you do, you grab your CTs in your main storage and you drag them into your factory. Next thing you do is you click on it in your factory, you choose how many you want to build, and you manufacture that using the refined materials and the lower tier products. So tier 4 requires a tier 3, tier 3 requires a tier 2, and tier 2 requires a tier 1 of the same item. And that is how you build stuff. Robots do not require the previous item because there is no previous item. So things like mechs are actually fairly easy to make, although they do require a bit more advanced refined materials. Okay, now let's get into some more advanced stuff. So the syndicate shop and data shards. These are something that is new to the game, but also required a part of industry. So there is a new island that they have created, and they're going to be creating more, called the strongholds. This is the one that they have right now. It's an extremely difficult island. If you are doing this, you will likely be in a huge group that knows what they're doing. Long story short, there's 2 bosses and then a final boss, so 3 bosses in total. You kill the boss, they give you these things called data shards. So if I go in here, data shards look like this, and you use these to make tier 4 items, which you get from the syndicate shop. So these are in the syndicate items. There's all of these guys right here. If you want to look at these in more detail, which is much easier, go to the market, go in equipment, type in commandants, and then you can actually look at what these do. So you can get the CT here, which we've already discussed. We know what CTs are now, and it gives you something like this when you activate it. Same method as before, drag these into your console, into your factory, and then using the data shards, if you look at the components, requires 400 data shards and a tier 4 of that item. And that will give you the tier 4 plus item. Next thing, saps and loot crates. So one thing I didn't touch on was MK2 bots, which you also get the CTs for those from artifacting. So they give you these capsules here. You activate a capsule and it will give you a CT. So the CT will be the exact same thing. It's just that you need the robot, the base robot, in order to make them, as well as an item called a cortex. So cortexes are gotten through artifacting, but they are also gotten through things called saps. And saps are actually one of the best method for getting these. So again, if we look at the map and we go to any beta terminal, it's going to have something called sap locations. Now, this is quite an aside note on the industry thing. It's a very, very minor thing, but as I am calling this the guide to all things industry, I should probably include all things instead of just not talking about it. So basically, these saps require you to do a little task. Usually takes about 20 minutes to 40 minutes. And when you complete these, you get a loot box. And these loot boxes will contain a variety of different things, but sometimes they'll contain cortexes. And that's what you use to make these MK2 bots. The other thing is there's also random loot crates that on these islands that will pop up, and they give you a pretty good amount of kernels and industrial implements. So that's also something that you could look for to get kernels and fragments. So for my methods, this is something that is a little bit more advanced and something that requires a bit of socializing. So it's not required. You can get the the cortexes through artifacting or through the market. Artifacting is actually probably one of the preferred ways to do it because saps don't always drop them. But anyways, I did want to touch on MK2 a little bit because, as I said, this is being called the guide to everything industrial. So MK2 CTs, they're the exact same as normal CTs, just that you need a regular bot and you also need the why do I keep forgetting? The Cortex, which you get from artifacting. Okay, now let's go over some builds that I use for actually doing this stuff. And I'm actually going to pull this off to the side and I'm going to just go over my builds really quickly. Okay, so mining and my field finder. So I've actually got a bot set up specifically just for finding fields. And it's literally this. It's a tier 4 lightweight frame on a chameleon with a geoscanner. And I've got a little bit of, well, actually I took them all up, but I had a little bit of all of the different directional and tile-based ones in here. So I use this guy in order to find fields. And then I believe I've got my robots right here. Okay, so my mining bot, this is what I use. This one is the Nexus bot. For my other miners, I swap out the Nexus bot for another industrial tuning. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. All mining modules, as much industrial tunings as you can fit, a geoscanner, and then shield generator and accumulator rechargers. This is about as basic of a fit as you can get. Anybody can come up with this, but in case you just want something to, see if you're on the right track, this is what I use. I've also got the tier 1 missile launcher in there for mining on Hirschfield because those really, really annoying jammer bots like to come and ruin your day. Okay, next thing, PvE farming, static, and taps. So I've got my combat account here. So this guy right here, this is my bot that I use for farming the industrial tunes. I've got stabilizers, I've got reactor ceilings because they love to drain, and then I've got as much damage as possible. You can have ECCMs on these guys, but I find the 4 tunings ends up being a bit quicker. Just killing faster is usually preferred to getting jammed a little bit less, because once you start getting the wave down, you don't get jammed anymore. And then those ECCMs become irrelevant. So this is my bot for fighting the industrial bots. If you're using a mech, you can obviously scale this down a little bit, but the general idea is you want some reactors, some weapon stabilizers, and some damage amplifiers. Okay, next thing. These are all going to be very similar. We've got the Tyrannos set up here. This is with a Logi. You use Tyrannos to fight. What the heck are these guys good against? I always forget my triangle. Okay, so these guys are bad against kinetics. That means they're good against... So they're bad against blue, which means they're good against red or yellow bots. So I use these guys to do my yellow taps. I use my Artemis to do my blue taps. And I use my Kane to do my green taps. So these are my different tap farmers. You can see they all have a very, very similar setup. Maximum DPS in the head slot. They are completely glass cannon, all weapon stabilizers, 1 uni plate, and then weapons. And these are what I use to farm my tier 3 taps. I use 2 of these, plus a hauler, plus a Logi. My Logi bot looks like this. So I got the 4 remote sensor amplifiers. That's to get my 2 bots. This was actually going for the strongholds, but the one difference that is here is I just swap out that injector for a regular accumulator. And then I've also got some, I don't actually have it here, but usually I will have a couple teleporters in the cargo. For when I'm done, I can drop one of those down when I'm on my last tap, and then I'm good to go right after my taps are done. So yeah, full tank, as much tank as I could possibly have, a couple of armor reps. These armor reps, just 2, has been good enough for me to do medium taps with, no issues. The amount of repping that you do versus the amount of damage that you take in hasn't been an issue for me. Obviously, you need to kind of wage what you have for skills yourself. I have max skills, and I've also got a lot of experience doing these. So you might want to fit a little bit more armor reps and go a little bit less damage. Although damage, of course, is a part of tanking in itself. If you've ever played Eve, you know that you need to kill stuff fast in order to reduce the incoming damage. Okay, so I do not recommend using heavy bots to do light taps. And I do not really recommend doing medium taps unless you really know what you're doing. If you are requiring to look up build guides in order to do medium taps, you might not have enough know-how in order to do them in the first place. Now, that being said, it's very similar setup for doing medium taps. You just build way more tank on your bots and kind of similar damage output. If you really want to know this right here, I think I was actually using some weapon stabilizers. If you really want to know, this was my setup for doing medium taps with my destroyer. Doing medium taps with heavy mechs is very difficult and not something I'd really recommend unless you have a couple people with you. It's annoying, it's tedious, it's dangerous, and yeah, it's just not really worth it over doing static farms and doing level 3 light taps. I just don't think it's worth it. So anyways, something to consider, but not something I would personally do. Okay, next thing. My cheese fit. So I've got a couple range extenders on here. I've got ballistic missiles. You can see my range is 667 meters. So this is what I use in order to do flux farms for killing the flux field farms. So when you mine flux, every 10th of the field that you mine, it spawns a wave of enemies that is very dangerous. So what I do is I mine, the field spawns, I run my miners away, and then I just kill all of the spawns at range. This can also be used for doing static farms without ever being shot at. So this is what I like to call it my cheese farmer, because I basically just cheese the spawn and I never actually get shot because I can do it at range so that the spawn never attacks me. Okay, so I covered the mechs that I use, and I highly recommend using mechs for taps. I covered my cheese farmer, I covered my indie farmer. The last thing I wanted to go over was a starter farm. So this is what I started with, 2 echelons, this exact fit, doing level 1 light taps. So 2 of these. This was my Nexus bot. And then my Logibot. Very, very simple. And then, sorry, one of my echelons actually subbed out 2 sensor amplifiers for 2 more firearm tunings, and that one got the remote sensor amplifiers from the Logi. So that was the last thing there. So if you want to do a starter fit, 2 echelons, very easy to fit, very easy to skill into. Again, kind of cheesy Nexus bot, cheap Nexus bot, and then a cheap Logi bot. My starter to mech guide, my starter to get my starting guide will eventually have a video showcasing these bots and how to use them. You could do the same thing with the Artemis and with these robots, but just lower it to a tier 1 fit and upgrade as you can. And then also use sensor amplifiers if you need to. And yeah, you can do the same thing with tier 1, it's just slower and a little bit more dangerous. Last thing is my actual Nexus bot. Here it is. For light taps, I like to use the lock booster. For medium taps, I use the recharger because it gives a little bit more tank to my Logibot because it uses shields, and then also just having a little bit more energy is never going to hurt. And then last but not least is my mission bot. I like to use a gargoyle because they're faster than symbionts, speed-wise, and I use this to do harvest missions. And this guy has made me hundreds of millions, if not billions, of Nick. This simple robot right here. That is, I mean, I don't know what the market like is for these guys. 28 million. I mean, that's a bit high. You could definitely make it for less than that. But yeah, let's say 30 million, 40 million to make this bot, and it's made me hundreds of millions, this bot by itself. So yeah. Okay. So if you guys have any questions about anything that I talked about, please comment below. This is a video that I put a little bit more effort into, so if you made it to the end, feel free to give it a like. And I'm starting to lose my voice now, so this is a good time to stop. And I hope that this explained everything for you guys. Again, if you have any questions at all, PM me in game, PM me in the Discord, or leave a comment, and I will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.